Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's webinar. And thanks for taking time out of your evening to join us on this webinar hosted by AHDB Beef Lamb. My name is Katie Bryan from the Better Returns Programme, and I'm delighted to bring you the webinar this evening on successful calving. Our presenters this evening are Alwyn Jones and Basil Lowman from SAC. The plan of action is Alwyn and Basil will run through their presentation, and then there'll be time afterwards for comments and questions. You will all stay muted throughout the webinar, but if anybody has got any questions you'd like to ask, please type them in the box on your screens. I will then ask Alwyn and Basil the questions at the end of the presentation. We have nearly 80 vets registered for tonight's webinar, and I'd like to also thank Ben, our media officer, who's working behind the scenes and will endeavour to keep this webinar running as smoothly as possible. But please bear with us if we do have any technical difficulties. We'll try to keep these to a minimum. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce Alwyn and Basil. Alwyn Jones is a veterinary investigation officer, and Dr. Basil Lowman, senior beef specialist at SAC. We have worked with SAC and QMS to develop this resource, and as there are still large losses and problems caused by calving issues and untimely interventions. We hope that this webinar will provide you with useful information to deliver to your clients. The initial webinar will explain how to present this to the producers, and there will also be technical notes for the vets when delivering the presentation and a short summary sheet for farmers. And there's also a BRP Plus document on successful calving, which gives more in-depth information for producers on our website. Tonight, Alwyn and Basil will share with us their presentation. So without further delay, Alwyn and Basil, I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you all for joining us this evening. Good evening, everybody. My name is Alwyn Jones. I'm a veterinary investigation officer here in St. Boswell's, and Basil, my colleague, is also based in St. Boswell's, and he's one of the senior beef specialists for the SAC. And St. Boswell's is in the Scottish borders, about an hour south of Edinburgh, so we're in a busy suckler and cow and sheep area here. And this is the course that Basil and myself have been developing now for over the last year or so. And we've presented it to farmers, mainly in the borders, but also in other areas in Scotland, on quite a few occasions earlier this year. And it's a course that has gone down quite well, actually, considering that we are talking and teaching very basic practices here. But we have found that producers are going away having found or having taken away something useful from the presentations. Now, before I start, I must say this is a very basic presentation. This is not me telling you how to calve cows at all. I know that you will know all this, but I am running through the presentation with you, sort of talking about how I have been delivering to the client. I do hope that you'll take this presentation. There is a full set of notes to go with it. There's a course manual which goes into quite a bit of detail. So, you know, read through that once or twice, and you'll be up and running to deliver the presentation. There is also a technical note for you to hand out to your farm clients at the end of the presentation as well. And I do believe that you are the best people to deliver this to your clients, so I do hope that you will take it on. So hopefully you can see my screen. And screen one is one of the reasons why we wanted to develop this course is the realization that a major cause of calf death around calving, around birth, is trauma and oxygen deprivation due to difficult calving. And it's true that the period around birth is the most hazardous in the life of all animals. But studies have shown that approximately 90% of calves which die around birth were actually alive at the start of calving. And this this quite clearly, and the main causes of this is difficult calving and hypoxia and acidosis, and all three are obviously intricately linked. But much of this loss is actually preventable. And the four main effects of difficult calving is from the calf. Hypoxic and acidotic calves have a greater risk of disease, primarily diarrhea and respiratory disease. Calves following dystocia have a harder time maintaining their body temperature, so are more susceptible to hypothermia. And difficult calvings, calves that have undergone difficult calvings are quite often acidotic, and the ability of the gut to absorb antibodies is reduced in acidotic calves. So there's a decreased absorption of protective antibodies. And in the dam, difficult calvings are associated with increased fertility losses in the dam and difficulty getting it back in calves. So four major reasons, effects of difficult calving. I'm now going to hand you over to my colleague Basil, who's going to talk about some. This doesn't go into preventative measures in great detail, but we are talking about a few, 3 or 4 preventative measures we think that can make a big improvement. So I'm going to hand you over to Basil Lowman now.
Thank you, Alwyn, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm senior in that I'm very old. That's the only senior bit about it. What I'd like to start off with is targets for our calving periods for our clients, because to me they're very clear. The first target is we should have no calving difficulties, no assisted calvings whatsoever. And if we can achieve that, then we'll achieve my second target, which is to have all calves up and standing 5 minutes after they've been born. And if we can achieve that, then we can hopefully achieve the final target, which is having calves suckling hard within 15 minutes of being born. So that's the targets I want to set to suckle calf producers, because obviously having a live viable calf on the ground is critical to profitability. Now, there are 2 or 3 important things in the management of cows which can help us achieve that. And the first one is how the cows and calves are bred. So we can look at the selection of the parents. And I'd like to start off, first of all, with the bull who's been used to mate these cows or heifers, in other words, the sire of the calf inside them. And nowadays, we're in the 21st century, or whatever it's called, and we have these marvellous things called EBVs, estimated breeding values. And in selecting a bull to go across cows, to me the most important and most simple thing we must be selecting for is a high calving ease direct EBV. That's a positive figure, and the higher the figure, the less calving problems we will have using that bull. Now, it's called direct, calving ease direct, because it has a direct effect on the calf. How big it is, how heavy it is, how thick it is, its length of its gestation, etc. So that's all we're looking for in terms of an easy calving for a bull to sire our cows, sire our heifers. But the other side of the equation in genetics is, of course, the female, the cow, and in that situation, we generally insert our breeding pressure through the bull we use to breed heifer replacements. So the first thing is, because the cow contributes 50% of her genes to the calf, the bull used to breed her also needs to have a high calving ease direct, because it's no good having a bull serving that cow with a high calving ease direct if the cow herself has a diabolical calving ease direct of, say, -20, then we're undoing all the good work we put in selecting the bull to get her pregnant with. But the other way the cow influences calving, as we all know, is the size of her pelvis, direct effects on mainly on pelvic area. And that is measured by a separate calving ease EBV called maternal calving ease. So the bull we're selecting to breed heifer replacements needs to have both a high calving ease direct and a high calving ease maternal. Plus, that's interesting, high calving ease daughter. I'm sorry, but it's very good. I should have noticed this before, but that slide is actually wrong, because the line alongside cow should read high calving ease direct EBV, in other words, the same as what the bull has. So I apologise for that, but I'm sure Alwyn will change it before you actually receive the final version. Right, so that's we've bred, hopefully, the right cows and calves to the right bull, etc. The next important thing in trying to minimise calving difficulties is the condition of the cow herself. And that's basically what we're talking about in terms of cow condition, is how fat she is. Is she very fat or is she lean? And in general, we know very well, and there's lots of research work to show it, that the fatter the cow, the more calving difficulties we are likely to have. And the thinner the cow, the more likely she is to pop the calf out with no problems at all. And Alwyn, you'll have to come back, so I'm pressing the button, and it won't go up and down. I am computer illiterate as well as being old. There we are, thank you, yes. Right, okay. So, fatter cows give us more calving difficulties, but it's not particularly what you might expect in them producing much heavier calves. The main effect of fatness in cows at calving is excess fat in the pelvic canal, which you will all have come across in your life, but also excess fat in the muscle of the cow, which makes those muscles less efficient. They tire more quickly, and obviously a tired, lethargic cow at calving is not likely to be successful. So cow condition is important, and you might be saying, well, in that case, why don't we have all our cows at calving as thin as rakes? And the problem with that approach is, oh, I'm going too fast. As I say, the maximum target condition score is above a condition score of 3. Once you go above that, you can almost guarantee calving difficulties regardless of how well bred the cow and the bull is that you've used. But the problem of not going to very thin cows, again, as you well know, is the leaner the cow, then the more problems we're likely to have getting her back in calf again, which occurs very quickly, after, or should occur quite quickly after the cow is calved. So the limitations on how lean we can have cows at calving to minimise calving difficulties is how well fed they're going to be once they've calved. And the better fed they are, the leaner they can be, and we can still get them back in calf again quite quickly. So in the spring calving situation, our target is somewhere around a condition score of 2.25 to 2.5 at calving, and that is reasonably lean to maximise ease of calving, knowing that, God willing, the cows are turned out when they're mated on good spring grass or high quality feed, be gaining condition and live weight rapidly, and that is very good for the cow's fertility. In comparison, the other main system we have autumn calving, with cows being mated in the winter on winter rations when we don't want to spend too much money or as little money as possible, then in that situation we try and maximise the condition score of the cow at calving up towards a condition score of 3, and that gives the cow more energy strapped onto her back, so she can lose a little bit of live weight during the mating period, but still be highly fertile. So those are the target condition scores we have. Now the final thing in terms of trying to minimise calving difficulties and have all calvings unassisted is we've begun to introduce 2 new supplements, if you like, to the diet of the cows in about 2 weeks before the herd starts calving. And the first is extra magnesium. And we're doing that for 2 reasons. One is to improve muscle tone. And one of the problems a lot of herds have had in the last 5–10 years, as I'm sure you know, is what we call slow calving. Cows very slow to get on, push hard and get the calf out. And the other thing for which there is less scientific evidence, but which I personally believe, is feeding additional magnesium appears to me to make a much wetter calving. So that gives you a lot of lubrication and again help things along. And what we're talking about is somewhere in the region of about an extra 30 gram per cow per day of a high mag mineral, which most people will have lying around the farm. The other supplement we want to add in the to the herd a couple of weeks before calving starts is a bit of high quality undegradable protein, which is absorbed in the hindgut, and that is to try and maximise both the quality and the quantity of the colostrum produced. Again, many suckler cows, and this winter would be a classic example, came in very fit. People are utilising that fat on their back, cutting back the rations they're feeding them over the winter to get them down into those condition scores we talked about just now. So they've come through quite a long period of mobilising live weight, and really, just as a safety factor, we're recommending now that people feed something like an extra ½ kilogram of soybean meal a day to the whole herd, starting about 2 weeks before calving commences. So those are the main three things we think are important in trying to achieve those idealistic targets I started off with. There's one other thing which will hopefully can make life easier for the people involved in calving. And this is work now which has been started off in Canada, it's been done all over the world now, and it's shown the effective time of feeding cows, pregnant cows, on when they actually calve within a 24-hour period. And we did some work on this on commercial farms, split the herd into two, fed half of them traditionally 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, and we decided a good night's sleep started at 10 o'clock at night, and farmers should be up and about their business at 6 o'clock in the morning. And when we did that, 57% of the cows calve in the working day, in daylight, if you like to put it that way, and not quite half of them, 43% calved in the middle of the night, which you know is a wonderful time to be dragged out of bed to do a cesarean or something like that. You can't see what you're doing, nobody's available to help, etc. But the other half of the cows in those herds, we didn't feed till about 10 o'clock at night. Now, it wasn't a question of going out and feeding them. In some of those, the food was put in the trough in the afternoon, the cows were shut off, and when the bloke went for his last look around the cows, 10 o'clock at night, he opened the gate and let them out to feed. And just by that simple change, we actually increased to nearly 80%. In other words, the vast majority of the cows calving in the morning, in the daytime, and halved the number of cows calved in the middle of the night. And the nice thing about that 79% calving in daylight is the vast majority were in the process of calving when people went out at about 6 o'clock at night. So it concentrated the calving in the day. So I think there's lots of things we can do to achieve these targets, but however good we are, we'll always end up, unfortunately, with some cows which do need assistance, and that's back to Alwyn.
Thank you, Basil. So, moving on to the cows that need assistance. First of all, I run through the normal stages of calving with the audience and talk about how calving is crudely divided into 3 stages. So we have stage 1, which really marks the beginning of delivery, and the main change is getting relaxation and opening of the cervix, and it can last 2 to 6 hours, but it can take up to 24 hours in heifers, and in mature cows you might not even see that. And I run through some of the typical signs of calving in stage 1 calving. There might be seeking isolation, vaginal discharge becoming increasingly liquid, a cervical plug is being expelled. They're showing signs of restlessness, pain, kicking at their belly. Some of the cows, the contractions in some of the cows may cause them to arch their back, shift weight from one leg to the other, or the tail may be extended as well. Stage 1 ends by the rupture of the first water sacs, or the chorioallantois. And at the start of stage 1, uterine contractions occurs every sort of 15 minutes or so, but by the end of stage 1, they will be occurring every 3 minutes or so. However, they might not be observable to the farmer. He might not see them in every animal. Stage 2. Stage 2 is the cervix is fully open, and the second water sac, or the amniotic sac, enters the birth canal plus fecal parts. I do make it different. I do make it clear from the start the difference between the first, or the chorial and toic sac, and the amniotic sac to the audience. So I tend to call them the first water sac and the second water sac. The first water sac they're probably unlikely to see. And second water sac is obviously the bluish greyish sac that appears in stage 2 of calving. And going into a bit more detail here is how the presence of the calf in the birth canal causes release of hormone oxytocin, and then in turn stimulates strong uterine contractions. And stage 2 might last something between half an hour to 4 hours. And stage 2 ends with the calf on the ground, calf out of the couch basically. And then just for completion, stage 3, expulsion of the afterbirth should occur within 12 hours ideally. And then, so moving on to determining how a cow will calve. Now it would be great, it would be fantastic if we could tell exactly when a cow will calve. You know, this would avoid intervening too early or intervening too late, and would reduce the risk of calf death, and also reduce the risk of injury to the cow, particularly from intervening too early, for example. And at this stage, I hand it over to the audience for participant engagement, and I ask them, you know, how do you estimate when your cows will calve? You know, what signals have you found that are good at estimating the timing of calving? And then we have a bit of a discussion, and then we come to the conclusion really that unfortunately, you know, timing of calving remains difficult to predict, and that there isn't one sort of hands-on method of predicting calving that is very accurate. The two main ones I described is progressive relaxation of the pelvic ligament. So these are the two diagrams here sort of illustrate the location of the pelvic ligament, and you see sort of dropping of the tail. And they have measured this relaxation. This relaxation happens over several days, but some work that was done found that when the drop in the ligament from the preceding day's drop exceeded 5 centimeters or 5 millimeters or more, then it was possible to predict with about 93% accuracy that the cow would calve in 24 hours. But this would involve actually taking a lot of measurements. There is a significant drop that occurs 24 hours just before calving anyway, but this is sort of difficult to observe, and you would need to get a cow in regularly to be able to measure this, and the negative of that is you're causing too much disruption really, and that can lead to other problems. The other thing is this, you get opening of the cervix, and once the cervix has started to open, calving should occur within 24 hours, but it could be as little as 6 hours, say in mature cows. Other things, you know, which are less specific, and they tend to occur for more days, and they're not very accurate predictors. Obviously, you get relaxation of the vulva, filling of the teats, change in body temperature, and all that. You obviously would need to measure that, and a change in the quantity and viscosity of vaginal secretions. We've recently added this slide in as well on calving alert systems, and quite a few producers around here are now using these alert systems, and there's various kinds available which detects sort of physiological changes which can help predict when the cow is more likely to give birth. I mean, this one here detects sort of tail movements, and when they reach a certain level of movement of intensity over a period of time, then the farmer gets a text message. And on average, it's about 1 hour prior to calving. There's another device I actually placed inside the cow's vagina about a week before the expected date of calving, This measures the body temperature, and about 48 hours before calving, the animal's temperature would peak, and then the farmer gets a text message at that point. No, sorry, peak, and then once it starts to drop again, the farmer gets a text message, and then when this device is expelled, there's another sudden drop in temperature, and the farmer gets another text as well. So there's a sort of 48-hour alert, and then there's another sort of 2-hour to 1 hour alert in the second one. So then, having discussed that, we then move on to discuss when is the best time to intervene, and how do we know that it's time to intervene. And again, I throw it back at the audience in the case and ask, when should you intervene at calving? What signs do you look for that tell you that intervention may be necessary? And it might be useful to have a flip chart or something next to you and just write down people's answers and have a bit of discussion. And I mean, we've come up, these are taken from various sort of resources, and I think we've come up with these sort of 5 rules of thumb, really, which we think are quite sensible. In that, so if the cow has been showing signs of first stage labour for over 8 hours, then it's time to intervene. Now, the thing to note with that is that if you're not, this depends on your frequency of observation, and you might not know exactly when the cow first went into stage 1 of calving. Therefore, knowing when 8 hours pass is going to be impossible. So you need to make that clear to the audience first of all. So it might, if you're not observing them frequently enough, then that is of less use. If the water sac has been visible for 2 hours, but the cow is not trying, then that's time to interfere. Some people call that the 2 feet 2 hours rule, so that's quite a nice way to remember it. If the cow's been straining for over 30 minutes and it's not making any progress, time to intervene. And then she stopped trying for 15 to 20 minutes after the period of progress. So normally in stage 2 of calving, they strain and then they take a break. And breaks usually should take between 5 to 10 minutes. If those breaks take 15 to 20 minutes, then you need to intervene, because it could be indicative of possibly hypercalcemia or some other reasons as well, which might need to be, which obviously need to be investigated. And lastly, if there's signs of excessive fatigue in the cow, swollen tongue in the calf, severe bleeding in the cow, clear signs that you need to intervene. So you've decided to intervene, and obviously hygiene is a priority to prevent uterine infections. So go through some tips just to ensure that you take as little as possible fecal material and dirt in with you. And then we move on to use of lubrication, and just highlighting to farmers that to use plenty of lubrication, that it's cheap and non-harmful. In particular, if you use the powdered lube, you can make bucket loads of it. Also, to take lube in from the start, not when things become difficult. So it's easy to ensure the birth canal is well lubricated before the calf becomes tightly lodged in the canal. So once the calf becomes lodged, and then trying to get lubrication around it, half of it drops on the floor anyway. So and a tip we had from one of our local practitioners was he was using the powdered lube and making bucket loads of it, and in particular difficult calvings, he would sometimes use an old calf colostrum feeder and sort of filling the bag with the powdered lube mixed with water. So filling the bag up, and then delivering the lube into the uterus using that stomach tube. So we thought that was quite a good idea. The other thing is spoken about is to try and avoid rupturing the second water sac, the amniotic sac, because until it's actually time to. So if you're going to put your hands in just to see what's going on, try and keep the sac intact, and until it's obviously when it's time to put the calving ropes on, then you need to burst the water sac to get the ropes on, obviously. But the fluid around the calf helps keep things mobile and lubricated. And then we recommend, before you decide to apply traction at all, to put your hand in and, with the sole intention of assessing what is going on, and this, so emphasize to the farmers that this will help decide what the best method to complete delivery is, so traction, cesarean, embryotomy, whether to get help, whether to get a neighbour to help, somebody more experienced, whether to get the vet out, and also determine how urgent the situation is. So feel around the birth canal. Does it seem normal? Are there any protruding parts? Is the cervix fully dilated? It should be wide enough, obviously, to allow passage of the calf. Well, within reason. Then assess the calf. Is it coming front or backwards? Is it the correct side up, or is it upside down? I mean, would need to be corrected first if that's the case. The position of the legs and the head relative to each other, and then try and determine if the calf is dead or alive. So talk about pinching between the hooves, using the anal reflex, suckle reflex, blink reflex, and also to try and estimate the size of the calf as well. And we do say now, but well, I'll come to talk about acidosis later on, but quite often calves are at this stage acidotic will have frequent and sort of violent, sort of spontaneous movements, and it's a sign of distress, and it's often due to hypoxia and acidosis, and this is a poor prognostic indicator, and it's obviously a sign that it's a sign of urgency, really. And then we move on to successful delivery. Yes. Okay. So, talking about how to deliver a calf in forward presentation, and there's a few things here that can indicate or suggest that you've got a good chance of successful delivery. So, the first one is when you're watching the cow strain, and you can see the hooves. When the cow strains, the hooves are seen to glide back and forth as she strains. As she strains, the hooves glide out a little bit, and then when she relaxes, they sort of slide back in. The second one is that the head has been brought into the birth canal, and the fetlocks have been brought beyond the vulva without any assistance. So she's done that by herself. And the third one is that the head and shoulders are in the pelvic canal, and you can fit your hand above the calf head as well. Now, those by no means that is true in every case, but those are just some predictors of successful delivery and good predictors. So the next diagram and the arrow sort of maybe helps to illustrate the whole sort of the calf gliding back and forth. The third point I made that when the head and shoulders are in the pelvic canal, you can fit your head, you can fit your hand, you can fit your hand above the calf's head. Then the head and shoulders of the calf, as a general rule, the head and shoulders of the calf will be in the birth canal when the fetlocks of the calf are approximately 1 hand breadth outside the vulva. So so that's another marker for another helpful thing. Now, predictors of an unsuccessful delivery would be, the cow has been straining for over 30 minutes and the head has not been brought into the birth canal. So if the calf is pointing in the right direction, feet pointing in the right direction, head in the right direction, but the head's still not been brought, that's perhaps a poor indicator. The second one is that the front legs are crossed in the birth canal, suggesting that the shoulders are too wide to pass into the birth canal, And the third one is the calf does not move back and forth when the cow strains, suggesting perhaps that the calf might be too tightly lodged in the birth canal. But you've decided that it's looking promising, so you're going to apply traction. So the next one is the places of the calving ropes, and I think the best, if possible, is to take this, is to fasten the calving rope above the fetlock joint and take a half hitch below the fetlock joint. And the idea of this sort of spreads the extracted forces over a greater area. Obviously, you'd need relatively, probably slightly longer, I think, than usual calving ropes to do that, because I know some of the calving ropes you can get are quite short, so you need to get slightly longer ones. But hopefully those diagrams illustrate what I mean here. And then once you're applying traction, it's probably the best way of doing it is to apply is to pull one leg at a time until the shoulders are in the pelvic canal. So the calf is almost walked through. And I might get this sort of 3 ways where you can achieve this. You can either manually pull, one leg at a time. I mean, if you have one of those jacks, calving jacks, who does the alternate traction, so each ratchet, sort of pulls one side, and then the next ratchet pulls the other side. Yeah. And or the other one is to pull one leg with a jack, disconnect, reconnect on the other leg, and carry it out. It's a bit of a faff, but that's possibly one way you could achieve that. And then next, so delivery frontwards. Once you pull the calf out horizontally until the head and shoulders are out, and then you pull in a slightly downward direction. Just to take one step back, which in particular, if this is a large calf and it's going to be touch and go, it's a good idea to twist the calf before the calf's pelvis passes through the cow's pelvis. And a simple reason, the reason is the widest part of the cow's pelvis is diagonally across. So rotating the calf would help to make sure that the widest part of the calf pelvis passes through the widest part of the cow pelvis. So you need to start thinking about twisting this calf, something between 60 up to 90 degrees, not quite 90 degrees, but 60 to 90 degrees, say, once the shoulders are out of the calf. So if you're using a calving jack, then you probably need an assistant to help you do this. And the assistant, so say you're in charge of the jack, and your assistant could wrap his arms around the chest and start that rotation. And the idea is that it's better to rotate before the hips enter the canal, past the cow hips, than once the calf has become hip locked. Then it becomes very difficult, obviously, to twist. There's another diagram sort of illustrating what we mean here. The next one is, and again, this mainly applies to particularly tight calvings. Is that so? You get umbilical cord compression when the pelvis of the calf enters the pelvis of the cow, because the umbilical cord will be compressed by the sort of the caudal abdomen of the calf, against the pelvic floor of the cow. And one suggestion here, one thing we recommend particularly is to take a brief pause and allow the calf to take a breath or two to take over, so the calf starts taking oxygen in itself, take over from the mother. And the other thing is to clear any mucus from around the nose. If there's a membrane, obviously remove the membrane. Because if constant pulling on the calf at this stage, will not allow the calf to expand his chest as sufficient. And occasionally calves are lost because of this failure to allow them to take a breath at this point. Obviously, it's a fairly easy calf. If he's done the twist, he's come to that point, then a lot of the time the calf will just fall out at that point anyway. But just a brief pause, allowing the calf to take maybe 2-3 breaths and then carrying on again. You reduce your chances of dealing with severe acidosis once the calf is born. So next slide. Hopefully this is what's going to happen, successful delivery. And then going on to how to deliver a calf in backward presentation. The most important area when the calf is positioned backwards is the hips. So the hips must be able to pass the pelvic canal. If we can do this, then most of the time the calf can be delivered by traction. And as a rule, the hips are in the canal when the hocks are outside the vulva, or hocks are a hand's breadth outside the vulva. And the key here again is we still recommend that the calf is twisted 60-90 degrees first, and then before the hips are calf hips or calf pelvis is brought to the cow pelvis. And then initially you want to be pulling slightly up from horizontal, and you can take your time until the calf tail head and anus is out of the vulva. But then at that point onwards, you get umbilical cord compression as well. And no, sorry, there's the umbilical cord ruptures early at that point, and then you need to avoid delay after that point. So so as I said, repeat that: slow and controlled in the calf tail head and anus are out of the vulva, pulling slightly up from horizontal, and then avoid delay after that point, pulling them slightly in a downward direction. So we've done the calving, and we then move on to discussing resuscitation of the newborn calf. And this abbreviation used in human first aid medicine, airway, breathing, circulation, also applies in calves. So first of all, consider the airway, and the first step to establish airway is the clearing the mucous membranes from the nose and the mouth. Some farmers use these aspirators which can sort of suck the mucus from the airways. Some people say they're great, some people say they're not so great. This is also, we discussed whether to hold the calf over the gate or hang the calf over the gate, by its back legs. And I think we've discussed this quite a lot, and I think we've come to the conclusion that we do not recommend doing this for a few reasons really. First of all, we have heard about some producers actually hanging them over the gate and then going away to do something else and then coming back in 15 minutes or so. I mean, you're massively increasing, no, not massively, but there's a risk of femoral nerve damage, there's a risk of bladder rupture, and also sort of hanging the calf upside down, the weight of the abdominal viscera on the diaphragm is not going to help the calf to expand its chest and breathe. So there is that. The alternative to that is to lift the calf using the calving jack. So it's to connect the calving jack to the calf's back legs, and then to use the ratchet mechanism of the jack and the leverage of the jack to hold the calf upside down. I mean, you're still getting the weight of the abdominal viscera on your diaphragm, but then there's less chance of this bladder rupture and nerve damage, and also muscle damage as well, by hanging the calf over the gate. And I suppose the main thing is that it's much easier for the vet and the farmer to do. But we also highlight to the farmers a lot of that fluid that actually comes out from the stomach. So when you hang calf down, all this fluid is gushing out, or not gushing out, but flowing out. It's quite often it's actually coming from the abomasum. And then next one is breathing. a normal calf should be breathing regularly within about 30 seconds of delivery. You know, it's irregular at first, but it should settle to about 45 to 60 breaths per minute. So ideally, ideally, if the calf is not breathing within 2 minutes, you know, you do sort of direct positive pressure ventilation, you know, and you pass a tube into the trachea in an ideal world and do all that. It's obviously not practical, or really on a farm situation. It's certainly not practical for the farmer to do. So some of the most common thing is to stimulate the nasal cavity with straw, rub chest with straw, etc. Cold water over the ears. There are commercial resuscitators as well, which can sort of blow air. So they blow air, but the thing is, if the farmers are using this, just highlight them as important that they make an effort to close off the esophagus at this stage. Otherwise, air goes into the stomach. Then you get distension and abomasum, and then that can also contribute to, or that can restrict the movement of the diaphragm as well. So it's not helping the calf in oxygenating itself. So, and in a lot of cases, probably the producers will need some guidance from you on how to, if they are using these resuscitators, on how to close off the esophagus. So then, the next one is circulation. But a newborn calf in the first 5 minutes of life should be breathing regularly, holding its head up, and lying or sitting upright, you know, as a calf would. And the absence of the above may be due to lack of oxygen, hypoxia, and acidosis. So we then go on to discussing acidosis in newborn calves. And the reason for acidosis is the buildup of carbon dioxide and lactic acid in the blood. Signs of acidosis, as I mentioned earlier on, that you get erratic and kicking movement in the uterus. And then once the calf is out, you know, breathing will be irregular breathing. You know, delaying over 5 minutes in lifting his head and lying upright, lack of muscle tone and lack of foot withdrawal reflex as well, signs that suggestive of acidosis. And severe acidosis has a detrimental effect on the respiratory and cardiac function. Acidosis causes a reduction in calf figure, so quite often it's the cause of dopey calves. Quite often farmers will talk about dopey calves. You also get a reduction in the strength of the suck reflex, or sometimes there's just no suck reflex at all. And the last one will be acidosis causes a reduction in the ability of the gut to absorb immunoglobulins, and in turn that reduces the chance of long-term survival, you know, due to the increased risk of disease. And treatment of acidosis is something that is generates quite of interest actually in every meeting we've been to, or every course we've held. And what we're trying to do is correct the acidity of the blood, so by administering bicarbonate solution into the vein, a sodium bicarbonate solution into the vein. I do stress at the point that, you know, it must be sterile. It must go intravenously. Ideally, should be administered as soon as possible after birth for it to be effective, and that is a veterinary procedure as well. So we do highlight all those things. The response in practice is quite variable. It really depends on the severity of the acidosis. In an ideal world, we'd be able to measure the bicarbonate deficits and then correct accordingly, but it's rarely possible to do that. In fact, almost never, I would imagine. So a safe dose to use is, so the 8.4% sterile sodium bicarbonate solution, a safe dose is something between 50 to 100 ml administered into the vein over 30 seconds. And we have quite a few veterinary practices in this area that are using this on a regular basis, and they're having good success with it. And the farmers that have got in the habit, you know, if they've got a calf that's a bit slow to get going, they'll call the vets out to come and administer some bicarb into the vein. And quite often, acidotic calves are also hypoglycemic. So glucose into the vein may also be beneficial. And the suggested dose rate is 3.5 ml per kg over 10%. So that's 10% glucose solution. And so, coming on to the last slide, we talk about, it's worth to mention that care not to forget about the cow again. So you spend all this time resuscitating the calf. Is to go back to the cow and check out for any tears in the uterus. We advise administration of pain relief in the form of non-steroidals. And to minimize rejection, you know, if the calf was moved from the calving area for resuscitation, if possible, and if it's safe to do so, the calf should be returned to the birth site, you know, because the birth fluids are an important part in the mother accepting the calf, and particularly true in heifers. And that's the end of the presentation.
Before you all disappear, can I just butt in? Alwyn is a vet, and therefore, like all vets, is under some lethal code or something. I find it amazing that dairy farmers can do intravenous injections for, what they do for? Hypo milk fever in dairy cows quite regularly. And some of our veterinary practices, with some of their clients, are willing to train the client himself to inject this sodium bicarbonate. Because I think it's one of these things, the quicker it's done, the much more effective it is. And you're all busy people, you're covering huge areas. And you know, if you're not going to arrive for 3 hours, then I question whether it's going to be worth anybody's effort to actually inject it at that late stage. So I think we need to be considering, as an industry, that's vets, producers, everybody together, whether in fact a significant proportion of our suckle calf producers are capable and sensible enough to, with a little bit of training, give these injections themselves. But that's an ethical thing for you vets, not me.
We'll be delighted to hear if you've got any comments, you know, any suggestions how we can improve this course, any feedback at all. So please get in touch. You know, I put my email address up there, so I'd be happy to hear from you. Because every time we run this course, it's always we always keep adding to it. You know, people always come up with suggestions, or we take things away from the course, or take bits out of it. So. We're more than happy to hear of any changes, improvements, etc. So, and yeah, sorry. At the end, there's a list of references as well. So, hand it over to you, Katie. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much, Alwyn and Basil, for that. I have already got a few questions coming in, but just before I start with those, I just want to remind everybody that the presentation has been recorded and will be available to watch back on AHDB Beef and Lamb YouTube channels if you do want to watch it again, as are the previous webinars both from ourselves and AHDB Dairy. Right, the first question that I've got was, could you please repeat the bicarbonate of soda solution that is recommended for the correction of acidosis?
Yeah, so it's the 8.4% solution, and it is a safe dose is to use 50 to 100 ml administered intravenously over 30 seconds. So it's the 8.4% solution, and I know some vets in this area are able to get it from their suppliers. It comes in something like a 250 ml glass bottle. So as a clear solution, ready to go.
Okay, thank you. And with regards to magnesium supplementation, is there a disadvantage to supplying magnesium all year round? And are buckets sufficient?
Yes, there is. I mean, the simple rule of all minerals and vitamins is if you supply an excess of anything, then you almost certainly end up with less of other minerals, elements being absorbed. So it's always preferable, as much as possible, to actually feed to requirements. So personally, I wouldn't make magnesium available all year round. The thing about minerals is they contain high levels of salt, sodium chloride, and just like us, cattle, animals will eat way over their salt allowance given the chance.
Okay, thank you, Basil. And with regards to overfat cows at calving, what would Basil's approach be to native breeds who get fat on grass or silage?
I think the problem with changing cow condition is that it is possible when the cow is lactating, in other words, she has an energy drain on her for milk production. But once you've dried the cow off, it is very, very difficult to take a lot of flesh off them. It takes a long time. And a lot of people don't sort of start thinking about their cows until a month, 6 weeks before calving is due to start. And by that point, it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to take flesh off them. What we really have to do is we have to seriously restrict silage, good hay intakes, and fill the cows up with straw. But in doing that, you need to be very careful about the mineral and vitamin status, which we've just talked about, but also, of course, the protein intake as well.
Okay.
Sorry, the other thing, which I should have said, is delay weaning. In other words, feed the cow a lower ration than her requirements, leave the calf on to take the milk off her, and that also saves money in that if the calf is drinking milk, it needs less concentrates to maintain its growth rate.
Okay, thank you. And do magnesium boluses provide adequate supplies of magnesium for pre-calving cows?
Very good question. The argument with boluses is that while they might not provide much magnesium, it is highly available to the animal. I would say it's an expensive way to do it. If it's cows outside where you've got no alternative, then I'd happily use a bolus.
Okay. I've got a question here that, I've just got myself. Do you have a minimum dry period recommended to ensure colostrum quality?
Well, the problem of all of this mumbo-jumbo we talk about in managing suckler cows is the spread of the calving period. Most of your clients, if they're good, will be calving over a 2-month period. A lot of them will be calving over 4 months. So if you're going to run the herd on a herd basis, then it does make a mockery of anything. In general, my advice to people is all cows should be weaned at least 1 month before calving starts. Now, if you have a widespread calving period, say it's a 4-month calving period, if you have PD'd the cows and taken a stab at estimating when they will calve, then I would happily actually leave my late calving group on the calves on them for a lot longer and wean them at a separate time. I think with this widespread of calving period, we have to improve our management, and I think the way we do that is we deal with early calving cows separately to late calving cows. Of course, the ideal is not to have the late calving cows at all and take the bull out a lot quicker.
Okay. Another comment, which I'm guessing is more of a statement, 35 grams of bicarbonate, 400 mils of a calcium bottle full of water does the same job. I'm guessing that's just a comment, not a question.
Yeah.
But I just thought I'd let you know that. And what are the differentials for dopey calves? Is this the same as acidosis?
Well, I think one of the most common causes of dopey calves is hypoxia and acidosis.
Yeah, I think, dopey calves is a layman's term for the big words acidosis And I would guess that all dopey calves, unless they've some genetic deformity or something, or are severely deficient in vitamin E, I would guess that all dopey calves are acidotic. And if you think of the reputation for dozy calves in our industry, it is always certain breeds, I might as well name them. Charolais have a good reputation for producing dozy calves, as do some other breeds. And if you think about it, they're all large calves who struggle to come out the cow, and the longer the calf takes to come out the cow, the greater its oxygen starvation. One of the things Alwyn found in reviewing all this stuff was that as soon as the cow starts straining, the placenta starts detaching from the wall. And as soon as you get any detachment at all, that's less oxygen going to the calf continually. So the longer that delay, I reckon a lot of calves are suffering acidosis of one degree or another.
Okay, someone's just commented saying it can be due to SBV, small virus, but which I guess there's various things it could be because of. Somebody else has also asked, is oral bicarb any value for producers who can't or just won't give an IV injection?
Well, we've considered this, and the problem with administering bicarbonate oral is you would more than likely disrupt the abomasal flora. So you want to maintain that for the colostrum to clot. So that's why oral bicarb is contraindicated. The other one is subcutaneous bicarb. I'm not entirely sure. The worry with that is that it could be irritant if given subcutaneously. So you could end up problems in that respect, and also the speed at which it would be absorbed as well, which I'm not entirely sure, but it'd obviously be much slower than it would intravenously. But then on the other hand, if you have to wait for the vet to turn up, then I don't. The answer is I don't know, to be honest with you, whether subcutaneous bicarb would work.
But orally, almost certainly wouldn't work.
No.
One, it would take a low absorption to get into the blood, and you'd certainly stop it absorbing many antibodies from the colostrum. So you might stop it dying of acidosis, but it would die of everything else from lack of antibodies.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all of our questions this evening, and thank you for everyone out there listening. We've had a great turnout and participation for this webinar. A big thank you to you, both Alwyn and Basil, for presenting.